I would like to start today's podcast with a quote that I heard recently. The only certainty is uncertainty. It's a short and sweet one. Makes you think a little bit, doesn't it? I see you nodding your head. I see you can resonate with that too. And it's got me thinking, it got me feeling, as most quotes do. But I think it's a really nice one because it briefly touched upon some things that we always talk about here on the podcast. But I think specifically in like training and nutrition related, life happens. It really does. We can never, know how to approach it, know what's coming next. But I think that idea of not being in control is something that we need to embrace because we can't predict the future. We can't always be ready. And as we said before, if you accept that, you're already a step ahead and you're already making that progress of being better able to handle these situations that come up. So I think just, that idea of embracing it, one great start to be. But here, of course, we want to talk more specifics and how we can actually start integrating it. And rather than just being like, yeah, life happens, man, it's whatever, and being so nonchalant, I'm going to put a little bit more emotion behind it. Like something else we talked about, being more present, being some emotion behind it, and setting us up with some skills and kind of an avenue to approach of, hey, when life happens, what do we do? What does that look like? So I think whenever we're faced with these situations, one thing to look at is just we have an opportunity to really develop these skills of being adaptable, being flexible, resilient, overcoming any fears. And those are things that you can take with any part of life, right? But for training and nutrition as well, which is what we're here talking about on the training arc. So when I say that, what comes to mind, Jake? Is there anything that has already been spoken about in training related that we can just approach? Being flexible is what do we got?
I think it's kind of pointless because if you're not just doing what you're supposed to do, you don't want it bad enough.
You pass with flying colors. That was a trick question. It's just, bro, just go out there and do it.
Exactly.
Stop making excuses.
We'll see you next time. Yeah. I think we're talking about autoregulation, man. This is something near and dear to both of our hearts, right? We both have spent not only a good deal thinking about this and using it in coaching and with ourselves and stuff, but just this is a big part of our both of our grad school experiences has been this idea. And as you said, like it extends to everything beyond. Obviously, we're going to focus on training and stuff here today, but extends to everything. For example, I auto-regulated my my camera here for this time. I don't look like I'm recording on a potato anymore. Hopefully, if it still looks horrible, then joke's on me. But for the YouTube viewers out there, hopefully it looks a little bit more pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, no, it looks great. I think it's great, and it's a great way to auto-regulate. Sometimes it's just what it means. But we've said autoregulation so many times, and some people might not know what that means. So to put a quick definition to it, just so we're all on the same page, and specifically here talking about training, it's when we adjust our training based on feedback, real-time feedback, how your body is feeling, what you're thinking, rather than just sticking to a strict plan, right? Instead of saying, I need to do 3 sets of 8 at 75%, we're keeping that open and flexible depending on how you're feeling. Maybe it's 3 sets of 6, maybe it's a little bit higher intensity, but that's what we're going to kind of dive into today is what that looks like for training. How do we approach it? Why is it even important to talk about? But I think, yeah, we can start there of why is it important that we even talk about autoregulation?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can kick it off that if you haven't already noticed, then you're probably just a complete, I don't mean this in a bad way at all, but you're sort of more of a beginner in the gym, right? Because once you get through those initial newbie gains, you're going to notice your performance can fluctuate sometimes quite a bit, depending on all sorts of things. Sometimes it's just a little bit, whatever. It doesn't have to be a wild fluctuation, but it's going to go up and down, right? You might feel stronger one day and a little bit weaker the next day. And then the following day you hit a PR. And then the next day your weight, it can go up and down. And we'll talk about a lot of the things that can impact that. And it's not even just 1RM strength. I think that's a thing that we think about a lot is like for powerlifting, right? But here's a great example that I've been going through the extremely fun task of double checking all the data entry for my main dissertation study. And it's, I think it was 16,800 sets, I believe is what it was. It's something like that. Where so for every set, it's load, reps, and their subjective pump rating. And so I'm double checking all this stuff, right? And what I'm noticing is their set 1 performance. We had a very specific protocol to select the load for set 1 in every session. And very quickly, it was basically looking at set one performance of their previous session and using that to estimate a 10 rep max, and that's what we would pick for the following workout to try to account for some of these fluctuations and just getting stronger over time and stuff like that. And when I'm looking through it, it's like there would be, so we're aiming for a 10 rep max in theory for set one, and there'd be times where this participant got 17 reps, and I'm like, what happened? Was it the wrong load, right? And then I look back and like, no, based on the previous session, that was a perfectly logical, like that fit the criteria that we used. Even just the eye test of last time they did 30 pounds for 10 reps. Today they did 30 pounds for 17, right? I wouldn't have ever thought to use a heavier weight based on their prior. So sometimes it can catch you off guard, and even outside of the strength realm, just with moderate rep sets for hypertrophy, it can still be all over the place.
One of the studies I always like to cite was actually one out of the FAU lab in 2016, I believe. It was Dan Cook's one, and they were
Yeah.
basically taking reps to failure with 70% 1RM, and there was that range of 6 to 26 reps.
Crazy.
Like some people 6 was their max, some people got to 26. So even there, that just highlights how individual it can be, and that's what it comes down to, just the idea of individualization. People are going to perform differently, right? 80% is going to be different for one person compared to the other, both in how it feels on the back or it feels in their hands, how they actually perform mentally, how much taxing it is. So I think when it comes to accounting for that, we need something, and that's where that autoregulation comes to fit. Say like, hey, we're going to use something that's a little bit subjective and objective to give us some direction, rather than saying, well, good luck, trial and error, which is still part of it. But if you want to try to be a little bit more accurate on the front end, we can, or at least giving more accuracy to approach it in a way. So not only is it just performance too, it's just how people respond to different exercises, right? It could be how they're recovering. Maybe if someone's doing something like lengthened partials, some people might respond very well to that, both in terms of outcomes and then also recovery. But for some people, that might beat them up a lot, especially if it's something that's new to them, right? So if we're having people recover on different levels, instead of expecting everyone to be recovered at 48 hours, we have to monitor that. We have to figure out, hey, how does this person react to X, Y, and Z? And then how does that affect how we design the program, how we approach and execute the program? And all these questions come up, and it can be scary and it can be a lot of information, right? And I think that's where it's another chance again to embrace that and be like, hey, a lot of skills to learn here, a lot of things to overcome, a lot of trial and error again, but also getting some guidance maybe too from other people, friends, coaches, whatever it might be. But it's another reason why too we're in this for that long haul run, because cool, hey, we're always learning. Maybe this block is the block that I just everything is on point, I'm recovering super well. Maybe the next block, life happens, I'm super stressed out. Maybe you have to run through 16,000 sets of data for some reason and you're just stressed out, so performance is taking a hit, right? There's other factors too outside of training specific that we have to account for, like those life factors. I think that's where we often get those biggest curveballs, right? It's like, who knows what's going to happen, and how that affects us in the gym will also vary from person to person, right? Some people might be a little bit more resilient or might have more experience of dealing with that, being better at turning switches on and off. But for some people, it might take a hit. So then how do we approach that? Do we just say, oh, just don't train today? Maybe. But also maybe we give some more direct options or some just options in general to approach, right? Hey, like X, Y, Z, let's approach. I think that's what we're going to kind of talk about here, is like, okay, if life happens, it punches you in the gut, what does that look like? So when we're looking at the autoregulation, where do you start? Like, what's something you look for, I guess? Like, how are we monitoring this, I guess we would say?
Yeah. So I think that's a slightly different question than like what all can lead to you needing to auto-regulate, right? Because like I don't necessarily monitor everything. We talked about this in the past about how like at least I don't want to speak for you, but I'm pretty sure you're in agreement of we don't need to measure every single thing in a spreadsheet. Like we don't necessarily need your readiness, subjective readiness, and how many hours of sleep you got, and your subjective quality of that sleep, and your subjective stress level, and like we don't need all that stuff. But all those things can individually and in combination impact your ability to train, and therefore maybe you need to auto-regulate a little bit. So just sort of, I think in general, being aware that like anything and everything can impact anything else. right? So like, as you said, life happens. I think that's a great way to say it. It's just, there's all sorts of things that can impact things. But in terms of what I'm actually looking for, how I like to think about this is like an input output system, right? So depending on the purpose, not just of the training block, but like of that set that we're doing, it's the main purpose anyway, right? And therefore that's going to determine what we look for. So for example, if it's what we look for and what we change, if we need to change something. So if the purpose is to drive strength, maybe it's a heavy top set or something. I'm much more concerned with the RPE for that load, that many reps relative to previous performance. Maybe velocity for that person, maybe a video just relative. What's the speed look like? What's their technique look like? I'm much more concerned with those things than I am about what their pump feels like and what their just some of these different things that might impact hypertrophy a little bit more, or might be more relevant for hypertrophy training, I guess I should say. So depending on the goal, I'm looking for those things. Just like for hypertrophy, I don't care quite so much about what their speed of every single rep looks like. If they can achieve a similar number of reps, we're getting a similar proximity to failure, or whatever. Just different things matter a little bit more or less compared to others. But anyway, so that's sort of the input that we look for is I think what's most relevant for the goal, and then the output is then the thing that we're going to change. So for example, like we'll go off the strength top set, for example, right? They're warming up, and every time they warm up, they do their last warm up or one of their last warm ups, depending on how heavy they're going, is maybe 315 for a single, something like that on a squat. I don't know. And we're used to it moving a certain kind of speed ish. It looks like a similar RPE or whatever. And today it was especially slow. The RPE was especially high. There's our input indicating that our force production is not as high as it normally is, assuming your intent is still the same, that kind of stuff, right? You didn't just like misgroove it or whatever. So if that's our input, then our output, being that strength is the goal, we want to maintain load as much as we can, right? So now maybe I change, rather than doing a triple, I'll do 3 singles at that same weight or something like that, right? To maintain the load that matters the most for strength, still get the same total workload. That certainly seems to matter. Reps per set probably doesn't matter as much. Proximity to failure, we're staying further from failure in that case, which is good based on the research we have, so on and so forth. So that's the framework I have, right? Is looking for what's the key thing that matters the most for this set. What is that telling me? Can we keep the plan the same? Do I need to pull back a little bit on something? Or can I capitalize and push forward on something else? But the things that you're changing, I think, depends on the goal. Do you agree? Do you think I'm dumb?
No,
What do you think?
that's super spot on. Yeah, I would agree with all that from the beginning. It's like you said, it's not something that we need to get every piece of data, because then we're just asking too much either from ourselves or from the clients, and
Sure.
that could be overthinking, kind of just personified there. It's like, okay, just do some work. Don't worry about it. And that's honestly what it comes down to, is just when something feels off, it feels different. It could be you're just feeling more stressed. The warm up is just moving like it is. It could be you're just not as excited to train as you are, right? There's so many variables that can lead to it, which is why we like to have some direction in trying to figure out like which points are going to give us the most accurate reading, right? And I think that also will vary from person to person. Some people, that top set, or the last warm up rather, is going to be accurate and consistent for them. For some people, it's going to be how they're feeling before they even warm up, right? There's going to be some variability there. And I think that's important to note. And it's important to know that there's going to be, again, it's trial and error in figuring out which piece of data is going to be our main piece. And that's going to differ from person to person, right? But that's why it's individualized. That's why we're auto-regulating. And that's why we like to approach it with an open mind. Like we don't need to have all the answers right away, especially if you're early on into training, or you're in a new type of training, or you started training with a coach and that's new too. There's going to be a lot of learning curves, but there's going to be learning across the board. So trying to figure that out takes time. So just be patient with yourself and your coach, or just the process in general, and just kind of learn from it. You're going to quote unquote fail a couple of times too. Like, hey, I thought I felt great, but then I went into it and it just didn't move. Still a very valuable piece of data, because okay, maybe how we're feeling isn't as accurate for you. Maybe we need to be a little bit more objective and have some video to go off of, or we need velocity, or we need someone else's eye that we trust rather than your feelings, because maybe your feelings are lying to you.
That's true. Mine do that all the time.
Yeah.
There's also like sometimes that last warm up feels really bad, but then your top set's fine, right?
Exactly.
Like that certainly happens sometimes too. And I think that that's just a matter of the longer you train, you just get to know your body better, right? And you can kind of get a feel for that. And you're like you said, you're gonna mess up, quote unquote, every once in a while, which is really not a big deal at all. There's like this idea in powerlifting these days. It's been that way for a long time about like if the program says triplet RPE 7 and you said it was a 7.5, you're like, oh, I screwed it up. I'm like, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine, right? There's so many ways to adjust and like it's not wrong, right? Anyway, that's a podcast in and of itself. But I love everything you said, and I think what came to mind too for me is maybe a way to kind of have some sort of guiding principle in a way on top of what we've said is like have some sort of like benchmark indicator, right? So like for strength, maybe it's you always warm up the same way. You take the same jumps every time. And like one of those is like, okay, I know how this is supposed to feel on a normal day. Therefore, if it's especially good or especially bad today, I can adjust. Or for hypertrophy, maybe it's even just like the first set, right? Because maybe you probably aren't taking as many warm-up sets, right, for most things as you would as a power lifter. And so it might be harder to judge based on those. And sometimes even if you feel like garbage, you can have an amazing hypertrophy session, right? So like you go in and maybe that first set is your performance is just way less than normal or something. Okay, then set 2, I'm going to adjust, maybe in this case, weight on the machine or the bar or whatever, the dumbbells, decrease that a little bit to keep the volume the same, proximity to failure the same, because those seem to matter more for muscle growth compared to just, the load on the bar. But yeah, I think having like that benchmark, like this is the thing that's going to help me make the decision. It helps decrease that decision making. We need to have some, but the less we do, I think the better.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it kind of makes me think of, you just end up creating a flow chart in your head, right? If you can keep as many things consistent as possible, we know what to expect. And when things don't go that way, we start to bring awareness to it, right? So you're like, hey, I have my flow chart and I have my checklist. And again, that checklist is going to be multifactorial, right? It's not gonna be just the one thing. Oh, RP is off. So it'd be like warm up plus how 100 kg feels and moves, and plus how my last warm up moves. And then if all 3 of those, I'm ticking the box of, hey, something's off, maybe then that helps us go to the next part of the flow chart and make the adjustment. And then that adjustment is depending on how those things feels, right? Maybe X amount of reduction or this amount of increase, whatever it is. But I think of a flow chart, think of ticking multiple boxes, because we're not going to go just off of one. And then that can kind of start getting you in the right direction, right? So again, that's going to be some trial and error there. But I like how you said that. And for hypertrophy, I know for me, it's one of those things where again, I maybe do 1 or 2 warm-ups before I do my actual working set. If it's a heavier load, like something like a flat press, maybe I'll do 3. But I have that approach that I normally take. If the first set is off, go to the second set. That also feels off. Okay, something's off. And when I say off, maybe I mean for hypertrophy specifically, I'm not feeling it in my chest like I want to. Maybe my shoulders are taking over. Maybe I'm not getting as much range as I normally do, right? These could be some things you start looking for. But then it's just, again, going through that process and getting better and refining it time after time again, and knowing like, okay, this is what it should feel like, and this doesn't feel this way. So then let me adjust. But yeah, I think that's super helpful. You can even go towards just super simple questionnaires. There's things like perceived recovery scale, which is like that 1 to 10 scale of telling you like 10, you feel great or you feel better than you normally do, then adjust. Or if you're between 7 and 8, maybe keep things the same. Or if you're between 1 and 4, decrease load by 5%. There are some specific scales. So if you're someone who's like, I do want to think as less as possible, those options are out there, right? But also be careful, because like we said, sometimes it could steer you in the wrong direction. Data can be wrong, right? Especially if we start implementing subjectivity into it. So that's where we need to figure out what's the most accurate for us, right? Because maybe someone, they're wearing their Aura ring, they wake up one morning and they're like, yes, feeling good. Aura ring is like, if you do not adjust your load, you will die. So do not try to hit that. Do not try to hit that 80%. And that could scare you and that could throw you off. Because maybe, like you said, it's a day where it might feel off, but you start getting in the groove and it goes fantastic. We've said this before too. There's so many sessions that I've had that I come into like, yeah, it's gonna be whatever. then something happens and I'm just so on, and it's one of the best sessions ever. Even if it's lack of sleep, even if it's just not being mentally prepared, it's just the body kind of just knows sometimes and is good at it. Now, that's not consistently happening, because maybe if I'm consistently getting lack of sleep, okay, there's going to be an issue. But every now and then, you just got to go. And that's what autoregulation is: flexibility, taking it as it is, one rep at a time, one set at a time, collecting data, assessing, adjusting, refine, and repeat the cycle. All
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
Yeah.
And there's even on that same note, like there can be multiple layers of stuff happening that can affect your training, right? So
Yeah.
uh like you're gonna have some of these in a few months probably, right? That like you're gonna feel
No,
like
no,
garbage.
please don't tell me
You,
that.
you're gonna be tired, you're gonna be stressed, whatever. You're gonna show up and you're just like I'm here, I showed up, that's a win. And then you're gonna get in there and you're gonna be like, you're gonna start getting a pump, and you're gonna be like, wait, I look good, right? And then that extra motivation bumps up your readiness to train, and all of a sudden they cancel out, and so like there's so many cool layers like that. Or you have all the fatigue and the stress, and then you have the but I'm getting really lean, and like huge motivation spike, right? But then maybe you get the like, oh, but I'm not going to be ready in time, and then it plummets it again. So that there can be multiple things. So I think,
Mhm.
as we always talk about, just trying to be present, trying to reflect on how you're actually feeling and stuff, that can be helpful for navigating those things. And I think the other piece too, on you mentioned like perceived recovery and stuff like that. I'm interested. I collected that stuff for my dissertation,
Mm.
that's looking at autoregulation, and so I'll be interested to see, once we can actually analyze the data, to see if there are any trends with those sorts of things, because we'll have things like their perceived readiness, their soreness, and their session RPEs, alongside how many sets they did and what their pumps were like and how much they grew, right? So we
Mm.
can look at correlations and relationships between all this stuff. So maybe we'll have something interesting at that point. As far as I'm aware, there's no data on that stuff yet.
I got some of it.
So
I haven't published it yet, but for my stuff, there was like a part of monitoring recovery and
nice.
assessing it. So we did do some PRS, soreness, all that. So that should be out.
Sweet.
if
Maybe?
if publishing ever went well, but it doesn't. But
Is it
it
submitted?
uh kind of. It's like in and out. It's like submit here, pushed back, submit here.
Okay,
So I'm
you're
like
in the
in
process.
that process of
In the process.
the
That
ever
lovely,
long process. Yes.
lovely process. Hey, Training Arc exclusive, bro. We might have breaking news at some point if it's accepted.
In 2
It
years,
will be
3
accepted.
years,
Just
5 years from now, who knows? No, yeah, that's just how it
get that.
goes. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff, because I think the one thing that I was most interested in was that idea of, okay, PRS, but if we're taking it before we do anything, before any warm up, versus taking it before that last warm up. Because in my mind, it's the same thing. In practice, that's something I always did, but I actually didn't. The PRS, we call it PRS cold. So PRS before anything warm up was actually more accurate than it was the PRS before your last warm up. So that
Interesting.
kind of play it counterintuitive to what we hypothesized, but kind of in line with the idea of maybe once you start getting things on the back, it might feel heavier. So that could also deter you in the other way, or push you in the other
Mm,
way, saying like, oh, it's heavier than it should be, regardless of how I think I'm going to perform. So like
yeah,
there's that interesting mind play that comes into account, which is why we talk about different from person to person. You need to figure out what works for you and just kind of going there. But yeah, we'll have more to talk about once it actually gets done. But that'll be something to look forward to. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, there was one point you made too that I wanted to highlight, because I always like to talk about it in this when we talk about autoregulation. Is a lot of times we focus on adjusting backwards. So say, okay, let's reduce load, let's decrease reps, whatever it is. But autoregulation also encompasses the idea of adding and doing more if you feel good. And sometimes people forget that, because there are going to be times where you just feel fantastic, right? You got that sleep in. Maybe you got a raise at work, or maybe you had a nice hug from someone before the gym, like whatever it might be. You could just feel better, and we want to capitalize that as much as we can, because hey, that's great. We love that. So sometimes you are adjusting in the other direction, and we want to talk a little bit about that. So has that ever happened in your practice with yourself and clients, and how does that kind of look in terms of navigating mentally and then specifically for adjusting?
For sure. You know, the simple, I think the simple examples are probably like hypertrophy focused people, or myself too, because that's how I train these days. You come in and last time you did whatever X weight, and you come in today and you're just like, wow, that was really easy, right? Like you might have maybe you come in and you planned to try to add 5 pounds or something, right? But it just felt so easy that you throw 10 pounds on, or 15 even, right? I've had that before. And because maybe last week was an especially bad week or something.
Yeah.
And so I've had that. I've had people, we're doing top sets, and it depends on the client. There's some people that I'll program like an exact load. There's other people where it's just purely an RPE thing. Sometimes it's a combination, like this range load, like this range of load is what we're aiming for, but this is the RPE I want you to hit. This range is just to kind of get you started or whatever, right? So there's all kinds of ways to write it out, but they might come in and I'm expecting, based on last week, maybe we'll hit X at our new target RPE, but they were just like, hey dude, like this felt awesome, I'm going to go up a little bit. I'm like, sweet. Now I do think it's helpful to cap that to a certain extent. If somebody, especially if they're making really, really fast progress, sometimes we do want to hold back just a hair. I've known people just get beat up a little bit too quick, right? Like your body's not quite ready yet for all the neural adaptations that are happening. Like literally the physical tissues aren't quite ready yet for all the neural adaptations that are happening so quickly. So sometimes we do want to cap it. Not always. It just, as like everything, it depends on the person and the circumstance, but it's just things to kind of think about and keep an eye out for. What about you? You notice that?
Yeah. It's almost one of those things where you don't outright say it every week or like tell them this is how you approach it. You kind of equip them with the skills very early on for them to then get to that point themselves. Or if it occurs where they're like, hey, you said that this was a 6R or 6 RP when it should have been an 8. Next time that happens, let's see if we can push a little bit more, right? We want to be closer, and this is why maybe have ranges, or this is why maybe, whatever it might be, you kind of start planting that seed in there so that they can do it. Because when it comes to the coaching side of things, autonomy is very important, right? Giving them the ability to make decisions on their own, feel like they're integrated in the process, and they should be. But a lot of times that's where it sticks, right? Instead of just telling them straight out everything they need to do and know, you have to do a little bit of that, don't get me wrong. But sometimes letting them make mistakes within certain confines is important, because that's a learning opportunity, and it might sit with them better because they made that mistake, and then they have that whole thought process that goes on, right? So this is something that I typically approach with that, is just kind of almost either make a mistake or let them get to that answer on its own. But it does look very similar to you, where it's variable. Some people I need to push a little bit more than others. Some people you need to pull back compared to others. But yeah, it's just, so long as we can give them the opportunities, or set it up for them, I think that's important.
Yeah, I have two other scenarios I want to see if you've had this. I hazard to guess that you have, but I've noticed sometimes that same situation where it just depends on the person, which I know is such an annoying thing, but you start to notice these trends, right? That maybe somebody, especially if this seems especially to be the case if they're really strong, that like in an absolute sense, that let's say that they feel really good that day and they took their whatever jump they were expecting to hit the new target RPE today, and they kind of undershot it still, like they just felt really good. Sometimes I'm like, just leave it.
Yeah.
Right? Like we'll just let's get those easy load progressions that don't beat you up more, and then just kind of pace it out a little bit like that, right? Other people, that's not the best move, because you have some people are like so strong that even if it was an RPE 6, it's still 600 pounds and it still is going to weigh them down, right? So like you got to kind of, there's no clear answer. You just got to watch the person and, see what beats them up and what doesn't. But like, this is the beautiful thing about autoregulation, right? Like it's not an algorithm. Maybe there's an algorithm to like a suggestion or something, or an algorithm that leads you to like, here's 2 or 3 choices, but then you're always going to have to see what's going on and like use your brain to actually make that choice. So you're nodding. It seems like you've had that.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
It's go ahead. You
I was just gonna say my other example is sometimes like the autoregulation feedback for, you come into this session and you're like, dude, I barely survived the rep range, load selection, RPE range. Like I barely was within my constraints last time. And then today it's like RDLs for me are the example for me personally. Same. Always feel really hard. No matter how much weight's on there, it always feels hard. So I literally will just add weight every time, no matter what, because it just always feels the same. And like the more you train, the more you can kind of notice some of those things, and you almost bypass the autoregulation thought process in that way. So I don't know, weird stuff.
Both of those examples I've experienced myself and then with other clients too, right? In the first one, it's like I said, sometimes savoring it is helpful,
Yeah.
especially for power through. Because I'm actually having this kind of example right now with my friends from the gym, where they had a block where just life kept hitting them hard, right? And every time they go for their top sets, it just didn't happen. Like something would happen, spotter grabbed it early, or it just didn't feel like it should have, misgrooved, right? And it upset them. And it's like talking to them, it's like, hey, hold on to that. Remember that feeling. Like you had it, right? It doesn't matter if the person took it early, whatever it is. Like you have it. Remember that. Next time you come in towards the same time at the end of the next block, come with that vengeance. Absolutely smash it. And that's gonna give you that an additional push physically and then mentally, like, yeah, let's go. Right. So sometimes again, knowing that athlete is important. Some people would be like, nah, do it again. Like we know it's like that. We don't want you to think about this forever, every single day for the next week. So let's re-hit it, take your rest, and let's go ahead and get it again because you can do that. Right. But like you said, it's gonna be person dependent. And then in the last one, yeah, RDLs are the same for me. And I went on that bout of just adding load each time and just letting it happen. I mean, went a little bit too far in one direction one time with that, but
Sure.
came back. But it's kind of like a 2 step forward, 1 step back, 2 step forward, 1 step back, and still progress in that sense. But even clients, sometimes it's like instead of giving them RPE ranges or just RPE in general, if they struggle with that, cool. I'm just putting loads each time because you said that 150 was is an 8. It wasn't, and I keep trying to maybe get you to push it a little bit more, and it's not really working. So let me just pick the load, and it'll help us both. Because maybe it's like, okay, maybe I was just completely wrong as a coach. Like that actually was an 8, and I just the video
Sure.
just showed that, and that also happens. That's okay because RPE is
Yeah.
subjective. Even if video or whatever it is, you have these other pieces of data that come into play. You could also be wrong because that happens, and that's okay. But most of the time, just based on experience, it's like, okay, they just needed to believe themselves a little bit more. They needed that little push, both from me and themselves, and they needed to see, like, hey, I am resilient. I can do hard things. And when you come to that, that's really cool because you could see like the excitement they rack it. They're like, oh, damn, like that felt
Yeah.
good. Like that's nice. And then we run on that again, and we're like, yes, feed off that motivation. It's that cycle, right? And I think this happens a little bit more with strength athletes just because it's a little bit more immediate, both in feedback and the number and the bar, all that stuff. But I think that also means it's a little bit more important because we need to be dialed in to understand where their psyche is at and how can we ride those waves in both ways or see them drifting away from the route because they start getting into that, oh man, like this felt just terrible. It's not moving how it should be. Oh, hey, pull you back in. Pull you back in. It's okay. Like, cool. We'll just hit this load and make it move really fast. Who cares about the RP? Boom. Moves fast. Feels good. We're back on track. So it is a psychological thing that comes into play too, which autoregulation can for sure help, but also be mindful that it can steer you other ways. So that's where
Yes.
that experience, both with self, coach, friend, whatever it is, comes into play.
I'm so glad you said that. This is one of the things that like coaching is more than just writing a program,
Oh
right? This
yeah.
is one of the key things. Like coaching is literally you're learning the psychology of the person you're working with, right? And all of your adjustments have to go through that filter.
Mm-hmm.
And the like people, I'm one of these people, right? Some people who are just so in their head about how much weight's on the bar that, and with the RPEs, it just gets like and they tend to maybe they have some anxiety with closer higher RPE sets or whatever. And so like that's one of the things that my coach did with me almost immediately. He was like, screw that. I'm going to tell you the weight to do. And then you tell me what the RPE was.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll adjust, he knows what RPE he's aiming for. And then he'll adjust the load for next week or whatever. So I never knew the goals. I just knew this is the weight I'm supposed to do. Tell him what it felt like. Send him a video. That was it. And that can work great, right? For somebody with that sort of psychology. Other people, that's the opposite choice to what you should do, and you have to let them have that wiggle room and stuff. So it depends so much on the person. I have a question for you, sir.
Potential
That
answer.
is, I hope so. Autoregulation is, and we've even been talking about it this way, usually is discussed and used in the sense of how much weight's on the bar, whether you're doing more or less or whatever. There's, some obvious other ones like, I even gave an example earlier of changing how many reps per set, right? So like standard hypertrophy session, maybe you change where you're at in the rep range to hit your target RIR or whatever. Easy examples. But one of the things that we don't talk about much is how many sets that we're doing for a muscle group in a session, right? And I think a lot of people have talked about this, some ways that you might adjust that. This is, to be transparent, the topic of my PhD. Like, I want to figure this out more, right? How do we fine tune this? And so I think about it quite a bit. And I'm sure you do too as a coach, right? Because we have these recommendations for like weekly volume or weekly whatever. And now we have some data on per session volume after the meta that we put out, but it's just a guideline. It's not like a perfect whatever. And so I'm curious to hear you talk about how, like, what autoregulation stuff do you use to help adjust how much work you're doing to try to get the best rate of progress that you can? Or is there anything? Do you just copy and paste the same cookie cutter program every time and don't think about it and just let people do the same thing always?
Are you asking from a athlete perspective, myself, or coaching, or both?
Both. I think both would probably be valuable.
And then, are you asking me to answer your whole PhD for you? Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing, bro. I don't know.
I don't want to do it though. It's hard. I want you to do it for me.
You know, I do think about this a lot. That's why I'm also very excited to see you continue to get your stuff out there, because it's an important question. It's a hard question, and there's just so much that goes into it. So I think I think I approach it slowly and purposefully, but also with flexibility, right? Because that's kind of could be said for all things, but it's more so the case here when something is so ambiguous or not well understood. So like, I always start on the lower end of things. Cool. If we're looking at set volume, let's go super low. Let's make sure that, we're as accurate as we can with our intensity, execution, all those things first. And then if that's okay, we can start playing around with the volume. So I think, so now, are you asking for within the session itself, or how I spread the weekly volume, or also both of those questions? Because they kind of play together.
They do kind of play together. Yeah. I guess when I asked the question, I was thinking more so about like total weekly setup, but doing it within a session is also valuable, I think.
Yeah. So whenever I start, it's cool. Say I start typically with 8 sets per muscle group per week. Automatically, I'm going to be splitting that up into 2. Because if we're just 2 times per week frequency of the muscle group, like for me, is almost I don't want to say non-negotiable, but I think it's such an easy way to just really maximize progress. Because like, it can be done with ease. Even if you're training 3 times per week, we can just have 3 upper days and make it happen, or upper lower split 4 times a week. It can be done. But when we're splitting up the work, I think the quality of work for each session is higher. And then I think we can produce more within the session, then within the week, then within the month, year, etc. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But I think that 2 times per week frequency, great place to start, seeing how they respond to that. And then if we're able to add more set volume, trying to like 1 here, then 1 here into the 2 days a week, and getting to a point where it's either, I don't want to say too much, or it's enough / too much, depending on goals, all that. So there's kind of a lot that goes there, but I think that's kind of where I'm starting, is where we're at for the week, split that up between 2 days, seeing how they're recovering, making sure that they're checking the boxes of execution, intensity. They're able to spend that much time in the gym, depending on where we're at with that too. And then seeing, if we can add more, what does that come with? Because some people, 8 is plenty, enough. Like, more doesn't necessarily mean more outcome for them. So we kind of stay there and just double progression for where they're at there.
Sure.
Does that answer the question? And it's science.
Yes and no, right? Yeah. So like, I think when you're experimenting with adding a set here and there, right? What are you looking at that helps you know whether or not that was beneficial, or if it was too much or whatever?
I think main thing, my bias coming in with recovery side of things, is that the next time they need to hit that muscle group, they're still recovered to hit that muscle group as best as they can, right? They're able to match, if not do better performance, accounting for all things as equal as possible. So that's my main thing there. Because if that's the case, I would still like to look a little bit further within that session. Like, say we go from 4 sets to 5 sets. When you add that 5th set, what are you feeling? Like, do you feel like it's just quality is low, like other muscle groups are taking over, or it's not, like, you're already so pumped that it's not actually doing much for you, or it's just painful because you're like, I don't want to do this, or you're thinking too much about it because it's a lot. So I think there's main recovery things, and then within session, like, hey, are you actually able to do this? And do you think that it's something you can replicate from week to week? Because again, if there comes to the point where it's like we're adding the set and we're taking up too much time in the gym, then maybe that's not what we want to. But if we can get their recovery sign, that's where I assume we're going to be making more progress. I don't know right away because it's going to take some time. But if you
Sure.
can just come in recovered into the next session and do that consistently for over a couple of weeks, I'm going to count that as a win that you can handle this, and we can keep going with that. And maybe after 2 or 3 weeks again, experiment with another set. And we almost, not that I always do this, but sometimes you kind of find the maximal recoverable volume in quotes of like what's enough. It's not very strategic, but it more so happens as you go on. And to give an example in myself, like I know if I start doing 15 sets of quads and hams, it's brutal. It comes to the point where I'm at like week 4 or 5, and I just don't want to do another leg day because it's like there's a lot in that leg day, and they already are tough. So like that's how I know. So I kind of approach it similar way with clients, where it's like, hey, what metrics are we looking at? Not only just performance wise, but feeling, desire to train, recoverability, and all that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's no right answer, right?
Yeah.
I was just curious, kind of how you think about it, and because there's so much unknown. It's funny because it's such an important question,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so difficult to figure out the best way to do it. And my PhD stuff is really just building off of logic that people like Mike Israel talked about this forever. Steve Hall's been talking about this for a long time. Like it's just building off of those ideas and trying to get some, because they make great logical sense,
Yeah.
but there's just no data on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's really was my goal, was like let's just go look at this thing that people are trying to do. But like I agree. I think the recovery thing is the biggest piece. Some little things that I tend to look at a little bit here and there are like, if you come into to this workout today, like I said, let's say it's a leg day, whatever, like your example, and like you're not still sore, cool, right? We didn't do too much last time. Seems reasonably safe to say. If you didn't get sore at all in the meantime, maybe you can try to do a little bit more before, right? Maybe one extra set makes you crippled, and it's like, no, you actually were at the top.
Yeah.
But it's worth experimenting with. Or even stuff like pump stuff, right? Like if you never get a pump ever at all, maybe it's just some people just don't get great pumps, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing. Maybe it's a hydration thing, sodium, electrolytes, whatever. But if all those things are in a place that we would expect you to get a pump, and you just don't, maybe it's because you did one set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could do more, and not that the pump is necessarily saying you're going to grow more, but just it's some of these things like pump and soreness and just like perceived general difficulty of the session, like you said, motivation to train, perceived recovery, like performance across the session. It's hard to find a really, really effective training program that doesn't impact all those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's hard to find a program like that where you just never get a pump at all, you know. So I don't know. I think it's still worthwhile to look at it a little bit and just say like, okay, um, session to session, you never got sore at all last time. Maybe we can do a little bit more. You're still super sore. We should probably do a little bit less, right? And we can kind of change the program for the following week. Or we also mentioned like within session stuff that to me that's where some of the pump stuff is interesting, especially you were training and you got a great pump and you kept going and your pump went away and now your arm's just numb. That just, maybe it's not too much, but it just kind of feels like it's too much in one workout. I don't know. That could just be me being a bro, but like it just seems like we might be better off splitting this up. And so there's like little just qualitative gray area weird stuff like that I think does make some logical sense. Hopefully, I mean, like my study will have some data on it, but it's not going to be conclusive by any means. Like it's one study, right? So, but I'm hoping that it at least generates some other work, and we get more of an understanding of that kind of thing. But anyway, I kind of hijacked the question. Do
Yep.
you do anything else like within a session other than looking at performance and some of those like subjective things like that?
Not Nothing crazy. No, I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the main thing. And to kind of touch upon that point and then answer this question as well, it's we're all still trying to figure it out at the same time, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna be like it's
Yeah.
okay. Like we're talking about, hey, like we don't know yet. We're waiting for data to come out. Like we talked last time, it's not that we're waiting for the permission. We're just waiting to figure out what's going to give us the most accurate thing, right? But
Sure.
even then, now we have a lot of strength in knowing what we're doing is going to give us the best shot, right? Like just because we don't know how we're approaching this, the way we are approaching it, I think gets us as close as we can get with the information that we have. And like I feel completely confident in my own training and other people's that we're still taking the right direction and that I know how to navigate that and figure out, like, okay, yes, the recovery is on where it's supposed to be. Let's add a little bit more, decipher that, good, bad, put it in this category, whatever it is, keep it in this back pocket, all that. So it's like not that we're saying you guys need to know everything right away or just like how we're approaching it, go through all these checklists. It's more of like, hey, let's just figure out what the best possible approach is in this situation. Take some steps forward, monitor, assess, reassess, adjust, again, going through that cycle again. So I think there's that. But yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing there is just recoverability, what they can continue to enjoy. And like, honestly, in practice, the biggest thing I found is just trying to make sure we're able to get in good training within the time frame that we have. Because most people that I'm working with, they're like, yeah, I got an hour in the gym, or I got maybe 90 minutes if I'm lucky. So how can I squeeze in a 90-minute session while still adding X amount of volume that I need? Maybe we have to get towards, closer to that 8 sets in one session and then 6 sets in the other session because we're trying to get 14 weekly sets. And then from there, how do I distribute that within the session to make it so it's not negatively effective? So a couple of things that I kind of go through my mind with that. But
Yeah. And for the people, like there's going to be some people who can do and recover from well more than 14 sets in a week, right? It depends on the muscle group usually, right? Like it's usually not hamstrings, but like here in the arms, for example, right? There's some people, or even one of my clients for like 4 years or something. Shout out Lucas if he sees this. That we've been experimenting with like really high volume stuff for like chest, especially, just like is like a focus muscle group for him. And so we did this, right? We would take for a week and just get this sort of feedback. What were your pumps like? How sore did you get? What's your performance look like? How's your recovery feel? Is your motivation to go train that muscle group still high, or is it starting to be like, dude, I dread this all the time? And all that kind of stuff. Do you have weird aches and pains, like tendon pain or whatever? So we're getting all this information, and it's like we would go a couple weeks, and all those things are still in the green. And I'm like, let's try another set, right? And they're still in the green. Okay, and we just kind of keep. And the rationale is basically we have this dose response relationship data, right? How many sets you do seems to be like the biggest factor for muscle growth. And so as long as recovery is still great and all that, then like why not try a little bit more? And as long as you're not sacrificing, other stuff. And then, we get to this point and now we have this per session meta-analysis data that's like, okay, well, once we start getting into that 10, 11 sets in a workout, if we can still do more, well, now let's split it up into higher frequency maybe, and then try that process again. And we can finally try the thing that everyone talks about. Well, a higher frequency lets you get more weekly volume, but like people don't usually do that. They just split it up into higher frequency. But yeah, so it's such an interesting when you go through the process, and there's other people I've tried this with that we hit a wall pretty quick, right? Maybe we add one set and we're like, okay, that's our ceiling. Or maybe we can't add anything. I've had that before as well. But some people can definitely add more volume, and it does seem to really impact the results. So like, just like what we talked about with striking while the iron's hot with top sets or whatever, if you can increase something and that increase is the output that makes sense for the goal in that input output system, and everything else is fine, all the important variables are taken care of, recovering fine, why not? Right? Why not experiment with those higher ranges if somebody's body is showing us that it can handle and benefit from that? Why not follow that?
yeah.
But like you said, like there's no there's no rules, there's no right or wrong,
Yeah.
there's no exact science to it by any means, and also at the end of the day, we're splitting hairs with some of this stuff, right? Like the vast majority of the results is like those first couple sets that you do, or for strength, it's literally the first set is the vast majority of the result. And so don't get too bogged down in like, well, how do I know if I'm auto-regulating correctly to get to the optimal number of sets, or like, you won't know, and that's okay. You're still going to be getting almost all of the results regardless. And it's just those little fine tuning things that do add up over a training career but it's not worth stressing about because we don't know how to make sure we make the right choice yet. Someday maybe we
Mm.
will, but right now we're doing our best, right? And that's really it.
Yeah. And when you're talking about like how we're splitting up our week, one thing that comes to mind that I I always tie regulation, autoregulation to, and again, maybe some bias here because I kind of was looking at this in some of my PhD stuff as well. But the idea of not only autoregulating within the session, but within the week, like almost proactively. So
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, if we start categorizing or attributing certain sessions of high priority or difficulty compared to others, that can give us the flexibility if we need to throughout the week to then hit a harder session when we feel great, or if we're feeling terrible, instead of doing that harder session, we do an easier session, right? Again, these harder, easier, all in quotations, that's going to be very variable depending on what the sessions are, what's important to you, et cetera, et cetera. But keeping that in mind and kind of going through that flow chart can sort of be helpful. So for example, like I have my 3 upper days, it goes upper 1, 2, and 3. Upper 1 in my mind is the hardest, 2 is the second hardest, 3 is the least hardest. They're all hard, don't get me wrong. Like this is all important. I'm not saying upper 3 throw in the trash, but based on how I am recovering from them, based on the demands of the movements, so compound versus versus isolation, more lengthened versus not. These are things that help me decide what that session is in terms of priority and difficulty. And from there, I could use that to kind of figure out what I'm doing throughout the week. Most of the time, I'm still within my actual set program, because with my set program, I have it integrated. So I'm hitting the harder sessions with the most recovery, right? But if something happens where I have to train 5 days in a row, which happens because sometimes you're just busy or something's going on in an event, cool. How do I do that? Do I keep it the same? Possibly. But maybe when I get to day 3, instead of doing my second hardest upper day, maybe I put the easier upper day in between because I need a little bit more rest. And I know that this upper day is not going to destroy me completely. So that next time I hit upper again in 48 hours, I'm more likely to be recovered so that I can hit my dumbbell incline press with a little bit more focus, with a little bit more recovery potentially. Right. So I think that auto regulation can fit within that week too, with the caveat of just being careful of not pushing everything to the side or forgetting things. Because there was that one study that did the flexible versus just non-flexible templates. Like, hey, you have your 3 sessions you have to hit throughout the week. Hit them whenever you want, so long as you hit them. Whereas the other group, they went Monday, Wednesday, Friday, session 1, 2, and 3, right? And if I recall correctly, similar results in the end. So that kind of, not to say that confirms what I'm saying, but it gives us some evidence that maybe that inherent flexibility can be good, especially when life stuff happens. So is
Sure.
that something you ever approach or kind of?
Yeah. I haven't done like that specific thing really with clients where
Mm,
it's like we have an easy, a medium, and a hard session relative terms where you kind of interchange them.
yeah.
But I have done sort of retroactively sort of that. Like there's been a bunch of times where I write a program for somebody and let's say they squat and deadlift each twice a week. And like a lot of people, their primary heaviest squat day and their heaviest deadlift day, we want some space between them
Yep.
usually, right? For recovery purposes. Some people, I don't know, I can't explain it. They just get way more beat up doing that than if they're on back to back days. And I'm like, okay, right? Like it doesn't make sense, but this is what it is. So we got to adjust for that, right? So then I'll switch, where the secondary and the primary days are or something like that. Or um, I've even had it where they actually did the best if we squat and deadlift on the same day, because doing either one beats them up enough and their hips are never recovered
Mhm.
if they're doing one on every given day, right? So I've had stuff like that. Um, I think the most proactive I've been about that sort of thing is if I know sometimes clients will come in and they're like, I can only train Monday through Friday and I want to train every day, or I can only do 4 sessions, but they have to be these 4 days in a row, or, so in that sense, usually I'll go in and I'll somewhere in the middle there, I'll purposely make a session easier. And I'm like, this is the session where we're still getting some good work in, but you're coming up for air a little bit. And then you can go in and finish the rest of the week out hard. Sometimes we just have to do that. Not always. Sometimes you can just blast it,
Mhm.
right? Like you said, you don't, even if you usually have rest days and you have to condense it that week because of scheduling or whatever, sure, you can adjust things. And in a lot of cases, it makes sense to do that. Sometimes sometimes it just feels extra hard, and that's okay, right? Like it's okay if you feel a little more fatigued because you had to do that. But especially if you only care about muscle growth. But yeah, that's how I have approached it thus far anyway.
Yeah, and like you said, and like we've talked about, it's autoregulation can be proactive and reactive both together, or at least again having that in your back pocket, knowing when to pull it out versus not. That's where it comes again, just kind of laying out the foundation of why we would make those decisions if we need to, if we're going through that flow chart, we're checking those boxes, and things are happening. So I think it's important again to know yourself or know your athlete and know how that can benefit and or harm them, because it's again a lot goes into it. And I think on that similar note, because we're thinking so much about it, that's one saying that always comes to mind, especially for hypertrophy wise, because I think it's a little bit in strength wise too. But Alberto Nunez said this: it was like, one rep can't make you, but it can certainly break you. And it's like, okay, if all else fails in my checklist, if that comes to mind, it's like, okay, I'm not going to push this extra rep just to make sure I get the 1 rep in reserve. Like if I'm at 2 reps in reserve, I'm going to be okay. I'm still training hard enough, even if it's just that one set, right? So like you can almost have these fallback plans in a way too, if you need to, or get in the right ballpark, because we will never be perfect. We don't want to strive for that perfection. We just want to be as close as we can and do so consistently. And I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, is how we're going to be consistently getting in the gym. And I think that's inherently what autoregulation is, so that we don't get hurt, so that we don't get burnt out physically, mentally. We're, pushing it on high days, dialing it back on low days, but all is still a step forward in the progress bar, right? And sometimes people think that because they're lowering load, they lost strength, or they're losing muscle, or they're not making progress. No, you're living to see another day, so that you can keep that tank as filled up as you can to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's what we kind of embrace about the autoregulation, and it's cool. Like you said, we put a lot of time learning about it in our studies and in our practice, and it's something that still we don't know too much about, but we're all growing and learning with it. So it's just cool to be able to talk about it here, and then also like learn more stuff about how you approach it. I think it's cool, and it's like, yeah, let me try this next time I do it. So
yeah, likewise, and I hope that sometimes it can be frustrating for people who aren't researchers, but also for people who are, that it's like, why don't we have more data on this yet? Right. But I hope that this whole conversation makes it obvious it's unbelievably difficult to study, because there's so many moving parts that all impact each other. And the name of the game with research is we're trying to isolate one of them. Right. So it's so hard. And I think a perfect example of something that research is never going to give us the clear answer on. It's going to give us some guidelines. But like, it's like you mentioned this, was that last time or the time before, maybe, about like, it's like the bumpers when you're bowling.
yeah,
Right. It's going to help you not get too far out of whack, but like, it's not perfectly down the middle for a strike necessarily. So yeah, it's a weird one, but a necessary one. And also shout out Alberto for being the quote machine and just always having bangers.
so many. I feel like I just quote stuff from him all the time, or like
Yeah.
they're just like execution wise stuff. I'm always thinking about his stuff. Like so many exercises in my notebook are like Nunez curl, Nunez lateral raise, because it's like how he had demonstrated them or talks about them. I'm like, yes, do it this way.
I have. He was the first person I ever saw talk about like length and biased stuff.
Yeah,
This was way before any of the research or anything. Talking about like on skull crushers, going back behind your head maybe, or the curl standing away from it so your arms extended back behind you. And those specifically, I was like, they were called Berto cable curls in my machine or in my program. And he's literally a genius, right? Which is just amazing, because he's a very smart person. He's aware of the research and stuff, right? But he's a practitioner. He just pays attention, and he cares about the people enough to really pay attention to their feedback and what's working and what's not. And he just notices stuff, and then he can drop a little gold nugget like that, and it's cool, right? You gotta love it.
Yeah, I think that's what's great too about where we're at and what we're doing and what we're talking about, is we're trying to bring all those sectors together, right? What are people doing in practice?
Yep.
What are people doing in the research? What are people doing in anime? What are people, in the mindset?
Exactly.
All these things.
Most importantly,
Yeah, of course, can't leave that out. Come on. But that's what we strive for. And it's always fun for me. So I appreciate you as always for giving us the good insight, having the good talks. Anything else autoregulation you feel like we missed or should touch upon? I know nutrition's a whole nother can of worms, so we could save
Yeah,
that
it
for
could be a
another
whole.
one.
Yeah, that's probably smarter at this
Yeah.
point. We didn't get many fun references tacked into this one, but
We're just boring
that's
now.
okay.
That's how it is.
We're auto regulating. We gotta say it's not there today. That's okay. We're still gonna show up, do our best. Next time, maybe we get extra fun references in there.
Today's just an active recovery day. We're saving
That's
it
it.
for our heavy
Today's the
top single day to come when we talk about the
yeah,
next one. Look at that.
exactly. Today's the easy session.
That's it. That's it.
You heard it here, folks. Going through the motions on the podcast.
No, we're teaching them the wrong things. No, but hey, just it's good for that flexibility. We're just being flexible. We're just practicing that. We're being mindful. We're being purposeful. But yeah, as always, great episode. Thank you all so much for listening and being here. If you have questions, because I know like a lot of this stuff definitely can be difficult to understand, especially if you're trying to get it tailored to your own stuff. Hit us up. Our DMs are open. Our Discord's always open. We love having discussions. I think ultimately that's what we're here for, is just like, reaching out that hand saying, hey, we got you. If you need anything, let us know. And a lot of times it is just asking us what's up or asking us for some direction, which I'm more than happy to share. There's no point of having all this information in our heads if we're not able to share it. So yeah, we look forward to hearing you all, all your questions, all your comments, all that. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So we'll catch you then.